So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Neville Morgan and I'm a Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction of the Opportunities for All branch at the California Department of Education. And what is the Opportunities for All branch, or OFAB? It's really 5 divisions that are within CDE that are foundational, fundamental, fabulous, and even fun. We call ourselves the hashtag Equity in Action because we start early with the Early Learning and Care Division. We provide care and enrichment before and after school and in the summer through our expanded learning programs. We address multilingual language learners and migrant children and students and families with our newly renamed division, Multilingual Support. And we provide nutritious meals and address food insecurity through our Nutrition Services Division. And lastly, but not at all leastly, we support inclusion of all our children's students in the work through inclusive supports and our Special Education Division. I'm going to pause here just to make sure that our ASL translator is able to be pinned to the screen so that everyone who needs ASL can see them, and then we'll move on to the next slide. All right, I'm trying to get my team to also back up a slide so we can go back to the ones with the photos on them. And it looks like instead we continue to move forward, which I guess is good. We don't go backwards, we go forwards. All right, that's the correct one. Thank you all. So presenting with me today, I have 3 of our directors from OFAB. Stephen Profiter, the director of the Early Learning and Care Division, Heather Calamise, who recently joined us at CDE as the director of our Special Education Division, and Veronica Aguilar, director of the Multilingual Support Division. We've brought you here today for a few reasons. First, we want to share some updates about the current context of early learning and early and elementary school here in California. Second, we want to begin the process of co-creating a vision for the future around meaningful equity for all of California's children through a focus on ensuring all young children have access to a high-quality, inclusive, and multilingual preschool program with alignment and partnership up through the early grades to support improved outcomes and continue the laser focus on equity. All this includes supporting communities, programs, and providers to intervene early and provide services to children who need additional supports to thrive in their early years and early grades, creating learning environments that embody our multilingual and multicultural communities and support English development as well as supports for home language, engaging families and children and supporting them to thrive in school and beyond, and doing all of this in an intentionally aligned way to ensure that our early investments carry through the academic careers of all children with a preschool through 3rd grade alignment. Today is just the first step in the co-creation process, and we're really looking forward to providing many other opportunities for us to work together on that vision. And more importantly, working on systems and policy change at the state and local level to put this into actual action. To that end, as a way of beginning that process of co-creating our vision for the future, we'll begin by gathering information and input from all of you today, using Zoom poll features and inviting you to engage with us in a more in-depth fashion through the Q&A feature on Zoom. Although we wish it could be more interactive, we also realize that it's really hard with over 1,000 participants to allow for that full access. So we'll be creating those opportunities as much as possible through this format, and then have future ones where we really can learn and hear from all of you. Your questions and additional thoughts in the Q&A feature will help us create an FAQ document after this meeting, as well as helping us build out our work more based on your input. We also will be sharing after our meeting a survey that we invite you each to fill out to provide more context to the poll questions we will ask today. And finally, we've created an inbox for you to share your questions, comments, concerns, and excitement around the P-3 alignment work. Just to briefly go over the agenda for today, we're almost through that first section, which is just the welcome and introductions. Hence why I said we could start and not have to wait too long for everyone. Then I'll move on with a little bit of level setting and information sharing around our current context. Following that, I'll lay the framework out that we've developed for our vision for the future and our preschool to third grade approach. At that point, I'll turn the reins over to my division directors to share their thoughts and expertise on how preschool, early intervention, and multilingual supports fit into that vision. And finally, we'll close with some next steps and sharing of opportunities to engage with us more. So here we go with our first set of poll questions. You all should see a poll popping up in front of you, and the hosts and panelists cannot vote. So Steve, Veronica, and Heather, you're out of luck. But the poll questions are, what are you most excited about or interested in today? What is your role in the P-3 system? If you work directly with children, how are you currently delivering those services? And in what areas of the state are you located? So I'll give everyone a couple minutes to do that. I feel like I need background music or something. All right, I can't see anything on the poll, so I don't even get a sense of how many of you have been able to click anything. But hopefully most of you have been able to complete the poll, and then it might stay up while I go into my next slide for those of you who are fast on the poll. Oh, and here it is. Thank you, host, for sharing the poll results. So what are you most excited about, interested in today? The majority of the votes went to preschool, but also really strong early intervention, DLL, a P-3 alignment, and equity. So I think people are here for the exact reasons why we're having this conversation. And role in the P-3 system, the largest number went to an early learning and care preschool director, but we also have a pretty large number of County Office of Ed staff, some teachers for 0 to 5. We don't have the teachers represented for K-12, so that's something we'll definitely do more outreach on. Some higher ed, parents as well, which we really welcome to be part of the system. We can't create a strong, equitable system without hearing the parent voices. Our resource and referral or other support system staff, and then others in the field. Those working with children, currently the majority of them are working remotely, with hybrid being the next piece. And the majority are from the South, within North, Central, Bay, and other, which makes sense if we think of where the children are. We have the majority of children in California first being in the southern part of the state. I also want to let you know that you can't skip question 3. So we apologize for that. You'll have to click on something That obviously is something we didn't think about as we were doing it. You will have to do something for each one of those answers. All right, they took the poll away from me, which means I think I can go on. Orientation to our changing landscape across California. So truly, before we dive into any of this, first and foremost, we want to thank all of you for everything you do. In addition to the ongoing work that you would do every single day, we know that the pandemic and other emergencies, such as fires, have created a challenging work situation as well as impacting people's personal lives. We want to recognize that this year is unprecedented. Our children, our families, our early learning programs, our schools, our teachers and administrators are truly experiencing a year like never before. Already dealing with the stress caused by a pandemic, we're also dealing with those wildfires, economic hardships, job losses, housing, food insecurity, and ongoing issues brought to light even more around systemic racism and injustices. As our state superintendent has often said, our heart is with all of you in the field, and we're here to support you. None of us ever anticipated that this is what 2020 would look like, but we all continue to be inspired by how our first responders and all of you have risen to these challenges. It is each of you who have navigated these uncertain times by reaching out to children, students, and families any way you can, with your heart and your compassion as your compass, and ensuring that learning is happening while also addressing other critical whole child, whole student supports. We know that you're doing the best you can during this very dire situation. The emotional strains caused by the pandemic, combined with escalating issues of racial injustice and persistent inequities, are having a cumulative impact on the well-being of our young children and students, their families, their communities, and their teachers and providers. All of this elevates the importance of early education even more, since high-quality programs and high-quality instruction can uniquely address the challenges that children with trauma face. At the CDE, we believe quality early learning and quality education is a tool we can use to create a path to a fairer, more just society and create more opportunities for all of our children and students. By digging deeper into the complexities of our diverse and difficult histories, not denying or ignoring them, we believe quality early learning and education can provide the pathway to healing, understanding, and racial and social justice. We have that commitment to all of you, but we also want to say, be kind to yourselves. Be mindful of your need to take care of yourself so that you can best help others. Stay safe and healthy. We need you all as a collective part of our system that supports the children, the students and their families, the teachers and administrators. So a quick story that I just added that I have to share because I think it really encapsulates everything that we're saying about all of you in the field around inclusion. And Christina, I hope it's okay for me to share this, but Christina Adams from Hayward Joint Unified School District just sent me a story about one of her children in their high-level inclusion preschool program who has been Zooming from a hospital room for over a week now. So the teachers worked with the mom to ensure that he did not miss circle time. They arranged with hospital staff to have him join from his bed. They worked on videos of making snow and ensured that each of the families had the packets of activity materials that they needed, as well as a child who was in the hospital needing full inclusion. They also did this for baking cookies and realized that you can't bake a cookie if you don't have an oven. So not only would that affect a child in the hospital, but we can also think of many of our children who may be experiencing homelessness and may need different materials and ways to engage, whether it be virtually or in person. So instead of baking, they used Play-Doh and were able to mix, cut, and still participate in that. So that is inclusion. And as Christina said, this is why we do what we do. Hands-on activities with teachers, with children and families, with those strong relationships. So to me, that is why we're here today. We know that all of you are creating very innovative ways to engage children and students, the families, and ensure that we can really support them the best ways possible. Moving forward, we'll go on to a next poll question. And this asks you, how familiar are you with the master plan for early learning and care? On December, I'm trying to think of what day, and I should have this memorized, December 1st. Thank you very much, Chris Perry out there. We were able to release the master plan for early learning and care. How familiar are you with this? If you're familiar, what are you most excited about? And then lastly, what are you most concerned about? And I'll pause while you all fill that out. And while you're working on your questions, I just want to give a shout out to the master plan sponsor team led by Chris Perry of California's Health and Human Services Agency and Janina Perez from the governor's office, along with Linda Darling Hammond, our state board president, Jessica Holmes from Department of Finance, and Kim Johnson, the director of the California Department of Social Services. That team, along with support from WestEd, led by Janelle Kubanek and Lupita Cortez Alcala, GPG's Maggie Stakely, Catherine Atkin, and other researchers. We were a small but mighty team who met weekly for over a year on this and really had to think deep, long, and hard around issues with the master plan goals that built off things like the Blue Ribbon Commission, the PDG strategic plan, and other documents out there. All right, they're probably still finishing up our level setting on the master plan. I will wait till we get those poll results and then I'll be able to move on. So we apologize for poll questions where we didn't include a not familiar with. You'll basically have to put a I don't know what it is as your answer, or pick something that makes sense. That is us thinking that everyone must have heard of it because it's been something that we've lived with for the past year, but we apologize for that. There also will not be a certificate for attendance for this. So this is not a webinar that's related to professional development, but really is more CDE reaching out to partner with all of you so that we can start our co-creation of equity in this space. All right, I was waiting to do poll responses, but they're probably trying to pull them, and I just can't sing for you all to have that background. So for my team, let's go on with the next slide. And as the poll questions come back in, I will pause. Oh, there you go. See, it was magic. So how familiar with this are you? The majority of people have read parts of the plan. So we'll keep working on that. So all of you read all of the plan at some point, but we realize it's quite long and it has specific sections. What are you most excited about? It actually looks like goals 2, where you're supporting children's learning and development by enhancing educator competencies, incentivizing and funding career paths, and implementing supportive program standards was the #1 goal that people were excited about, but lots of other areas in there with excitement. So since our DLL and inclusion ones in equity aren't coming to the top, we'll make sure that we excite you so much from today's presentation that those become your passion and charge, just like they are ours. Our goal, as we keep talking about, is to make sure we have more bilingual or multilingual programs and ensure every one of our programs is fully inclusive. So, oh, you took away #3 from me. #3 also had results, thank you. Sorry, TSD, what are you most concerned about? And the one with the largest concerns was goal 3, unifying funding to advance equity and opportunity. As you know, in a pandemic, I think we're all a little nervous about budgets and where we'll have money and what else can we do to ensure we have resources that are needed. And then goal 2, supporting their learning and that competencies, also concerns across them, but number 1 really being the funding piece. Thank you, host, for sharing those poll results. All right, so the master plan goals does have 4 areas with the programs, workforce, funding, governance, and administration, with a cross-cutting areas of access, quality, opportunity, and affordability of early learning and care. There's significant compatibility and alignment between the master plan priorities and those of President-elect Biden and Vice President Harris. Both share an interest in caring for the very youngest as a means to support their future success and that of their families by supporting their ability to engage in education, training, and employment through paid family leave. The master plan and the work that has come before it, including the Transforming the Workforce effort and the Blue Ribbon Commission report, demonstrate California's readiness to put in place major change in how we care for and support young children through universal preschool and quality early learning and care through supporting and compensating the workforce. Both also recognize the need to support our infrastructure, including much needed facilities, renovation, repair, and expansion. The potential for additional federal support presents an opportunity to accelerate the expansion of comprehensive services for children, students, families, and providers. And California can use our master plan to signal its readiness as an early partner with the incoming Biden administration. And for someone who's had to write quite a few federal applications, as well as I think my director team here, we're hoping that some of this readiness through the master plan puts us in a good space to be able to justify any competitive funding that might come out, although we're hoping for just non-competitive funding since all states could use this. Before we dive into our next area, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on equity. So if we go to the next slide, we'll be able to see our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond. Oh, it looks like we missed a couple slides there, sorry y'all. And look at some of the things around justice and tearing down fences instead of building up walls. One of the key ways our state superintendent measures success is by looking at the number of high school students that are prepared for college and career pathways, and by closing the achievement gap for African American and Latino students, our English learners, our special education students, foster youth, and students from low-income backgrounds. California ranks 47th in the nation in the average of our 4th grade reading levels. Our studies show that students who are not on track with reading proficiency in the 3rd grade have a significantly higher risk of dropping out of high school. Disparities in achievement threaten the future for many of our California students, particularly those who are African American and Latino, or in some of the other groups, such as our foster youth. And I forgot to mention, as we look there at our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, that for the first time, all the heads of California's public education system are Black or Latino. This is huge progress in itself and highlights the diversity of California's leadership at the very top and how our leadership reflects the children and students of California. We know that part of the equity issue is being able to see yourself as a child in the work and in the leadership at the very top. And so not only in California, but now as we look at our vice president-elect, we see a woman and a woman of color, and the groundbreakingness and what that means to our children and our students of color. Truly, that is a place where our country has needed to be for years, and we're all so grateful that our 2021 will start off much stronger than our 2020 has been. As we look at things like early intervention to close the achievement gap, we all know that the achievement gap begins before a student ever enters a kindergarten or a TK classroom. Low-income students in particular tend to be at a disadvantage when they start school, as many of their families cannot afford to send them to increasingly expensive preschools, or to preschools that only operate for part of the day, instead of really supporting working families. For that reason, our superintendent has championed from the beginning areas that are now in the master plan, as well as in President-elect Biden's plan, removing the barriers to kindergarten education programs, investing in high-quality early education and care programs, and making universal preschool a reality. Quality, equity, and inclusion in the early years are our best evidence-based strategies for closing the achievement gap and building our future. This means addressing implicit bias and racism from the top down, focusing on inclusion and grappling with disproportionality in special education, redesigning our approach to quality in early learning and care, and some of you may have seen our superintendent launched an Education to End Hate initiative as part of that work. Moving on, research clearly demonstrates that inequities fuel the opportunity gap early. Student achievement gaps already exist when children enter school. There's actually research that shows that we can see them at 9 and 18 months. Children of color and dual language learners are identified for special educational supports later than their peers, exacerbating delays and long-term disabilities. Too many young children with disabilities are only offered special education services in settings separate from their peers. Dual language learners, or English learners in K-12, have one of the highest dropout rates, almost 24% of any group in the state. Children of color, especially boys, are more likely to experience suspension and expulsion in preschool and in the early elementary grades. And poor academic achievement in elementary school is one of the strongest predictors of later dropout. The vision for PU3 is to improve the quality and coherence of children's learning opportunities from the experiences children have in early learning, including pre-K, Head Start, childcare, and other early learning and care opportunities before or the pre-formal entry into school and extending through elementary school. P3 signifies both an age range and a lens for thinking about organization and systems level change. A recent LPI report that summarized and distilled decades of research on preschool effectiveness concluded, the weight of a sizable body of evidence indicates that preschool programs make a substantial difference in preparing children for school. But even the highest quality preschool cannot inoculate children from the detrimental effects of poverty or poor elementary and secondary schools. Sustained benefit require investments in children and their families that are also sustained from preschool through grade school and beyond. I think that really goes to there's not one answer, but we all have to work together to ensure that there's coherence across a system and that all areas of the system are supported to be the highest quality and support families, children, and students in the best way possible, while continuing to address anything around racism and anti-equity and other issues. So from here, I'm actually going to hand it off to Steve.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. So as we look at addressing equity issues within preschool, standards alignment is key, so that we have a standards for a high quality program that don't vary substantially between programs. For example, as we go back to the master plan, it recommends first, implicit bias training for our educators to reduce exclusionary discipline practices, including suspension and expulsion. In addition, strong assessment and data systems to ensure that teachers have the information they need to individualize instructions, programs have the information they need to fuel continuous improvement, and policymakers have the information they need to track and address gaps and inequities. In addition, inclusive environments for all children must support inclusive learning for children with disabilities, and a requirement for programs to employ bilingual teachers in programs with a high concentration of dual language learners who speak a common language for all children. And I believe I am handing off to Heather for the next slide.
Had to unmute myself. Thank you, Stephen. In regards to addressing equity through early intervention, implementing universal design for learning and ensuring inclusive access or across the early years is critical. And by UDL, I mean the most common sort of definition of the framework in terms of multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and also multiple means of engagement. So really, how are our young learners accessing the content in multiple ways and demonstrating what they know through multiple methods as well? In addition, what we know is that providing inclusive access and classrooms for our early learners not only benefits students with disabilities, but also students without disabilities as well. I often note that inclusion is not just one way, right? And so inclusion is not just providing exposure and access to non-disabled peers for disabled students, but also there's also a benefit as well to the non-disabled peers. In relation to preschool LRE, there's a slide a little bit later on that will paint a landscape of where California sits in terms of offering inclusive access in classrooms for our early learners that we will get to a little bit later. But when we discuss preschool LRE, there are two indicators within special education that we use to determine LRE and inclusive settings across the state. Those are indicator 6A, which is the percentage of children receiving the majority of special education services and related services in a regular education, or a regular early childhood program. And then 6B represents a percentage of children attending a separate special education class, separate school, or residential facility. To not spoil it too much, California is a bit behind in terms of providing inclusive access for our young learners. I would also like to note that in terms of preschool LRE by disability, it's interesting to note that children that are labeled with autism or have an intellectual or cognitive disability are more likely to be in separate settings, while children with emotional, speech, and other disabilities are likely to be included in regular education settings with their peers. Disproportionality is another aspect of special education that we measure in terms of through two indicators. Without getting too technical, indicator 9 is a part of our state performance plan, looks at the disproportionate representation in special education that is a result of inappropriate identification. Indicator 10 is disproportionate representation in a specific disability category that is also the result of inappropriate identification. Therefore, making it extremely critical that we take a look at our identification systems to ensure that we are appropriately identifying and supporting our early learners as well. And to piggyback on Steve's notion or suggestion of implicit bias training, this also obviously impacts the special education field as well, just in terms of everything from assessment to instruction to working with disability categories, and also looking at suspension and expulsion as well. I will now pass it on to Veronica for multilingual.
Thank you, Heather. As the director of the Multilingual Support Division since 2015, I have been very fortunate to have great partnerships with the division directors here on this webinar and key stakeholders to promote multilingual programs from early education to higher education. And it is important to note that it will be critical to have these partnerships across all agencies to fully implement the master plan. Early Edge California has partnered with the California Department of Education to address equity through multilingual supports for young dual language learners. It has been part of the stakeholder groups that developed the groundbreaking EL roadmap policy adopted by the state board, which I will cover a little more in depth later on. Early Edge California released recommendations for early learning and care programs to address the needs of young dual language learners as they develop multilingualism. We know in California, over half of our population is Latino. These recommendations include ensuring that programs emphasize the benefits of bilingualism in the home language and families, supporting biliteracy with curriculum instruction and materials that meet young dual language learners' needs, providing teachers and administrators with professional learning that focuses on best practices for dual language learners and biliteracy, and starting dual language programs in preschool and continuing them through elementary and beyond. I will discuss the document that these recommendations comes from later in the presentation and provide a link so that you can access these recommendations and others in the future. Note that these recommendations match the research findings and recommendations from the Academy of Science. We know how important it is to validate the language and the culture the students bring. So now, as we have some leveling information that you have received thus far, let's engage in this poll question. From your point of view, what is the greatest area of support needed to advance equity in preschool, CSPP, and ELC through the early elementary grades?
Thank you so much, Veronica, Heather, and Stephen. I want to point out that our poll questions are not exhaustive lists. They are actually quite short. And at the end of this and the survey that we'll launch, you'll be able to give open-ended responses to some questions. So while you're addressing the poll question, I'm going to respond to a few of the things that have popped up in the questions and answers components. A little bit around connections with DSS. So we, of course, are partnering with the California Department of Social Services in a variety of ways, both in our early learning space and in our K-12 space. And that will continue, but actually will grow as part of our CDE family will then become the DSS family. And so we look at it as our family is growing, and we'll work together with them to really ensure that all of the efforts around P3 also include infant, toddler, and go up. I also want to acknowledge a comment around Indigenous people. So I hope that you will see when we say all, we do mean all, and that when we talk about languages, we actually talk about native languages as well, and language preservation as being a critical component of that. We've been engaged in something called Project Hope with the Tribal Child Care Association of California for the past several years. And so a lot of our equity and anti-racist work lives in that space with our tribal partners. And we will continue that work even when some of the partnership moves to DSS. It is not that you can give away relationship and equity work, but we will continue that here and also bring it more deeply into our work with special education with our multilingual language services as well. And then another comment or question around implicit bias not being enough, which is so, so true. We actually have to tackle head-on anti-racism and what sort of practices and trainings and attitudes and beliefs do we have to address while we're doing through this. And the bigger issue of compensation, not bigger than race and equity, but the bigger issue in early learning when we look at expansion and how are we tackling these is compensation and who does our work. And our commitment to working with all of you to address that. A lot of the people here, actually all of us, came from the field, whether it be in special education and being a special ed teacher, or being a migrant worker and working in the fields, and then becoming a teacher and an administrator and going through that. We've all come through the ranks and all worked on the ground and supported all levels of early learning and education. So definitely understand how to uplift and work with our early educators, with our providers, and address the issue that most of the people in this field are women of color who do not get paid at a rate that allows them to have a sustainable living wage. So our poll results, as we look through this and what we need to work on the most, implicit bias training, definitely a piece on that, universal preschool funding and how we use that, and inclusive preschool training and support, really rising to the top, but components there around all of that work. So thank you so much for completing that poll. So our call to action in this space really is our state superintendent often talks about our compelling need to act and to ensure our work immediately supports children and students due to the urgency of addressing these inequitable opportunities and ensuring that we're tackling head-on issues around anti-hate, anti-racism, and supporting outcomes for all of our students and young children. As a part of this, when our superintendent first came to the California Department of Education, he convened transition teams on many relevant topics to this that I am going to guess that a lot of you were engaged in. So closing the achievement gap, early learning, literacy, dual language instruction, special education, data, equity, accountability, and more. And a lot of those areas that came out from those transition works, you'll see collected and included in part of our P3 work. So redesigning our approach to quality, addressing implicit bias from the top down, and I'll include in there addressing anti-racism and anti-hate, focusing on inclusion and grappling with disproportionality in special education, building multilingual supports throughout our systems, starting at the very beginning and going all the way through, and aligning policies and practices across the early years and early grades. All of that actually came out in that transition team work that many of you participated in. So thank you. Our next poll question gets to what is PITA 3 alignment? So if we bring up that slide, how can that really address and help our preschoolers? And you'll see a few questions in there around the vision and future of P3. While you take that, I'll try to address a couple more areas from the questions and looking at things like our Global 2030, which Veronica can respond to even better than I can, but is definitely something that we continue to share. Veronica, do you want to say a few words about our Global 2030?
Sure. The goal of Global 2030 is actually an initiative by the superintendent to have at least half of the student population enrolled in a multilingual program or a class that would allow them to eventually become bilingual. Or if they come in to the early education setting or the K-12 system already knowing another language, maintaining that language. And the goal is by 2050, having all the students enrolled in one or more classes that would lead them to become bilingual. We know, as I mentioned before, over half of the student population in California, it speaks another language. And so it's an asset that we have all the students with another language and that we need to harvest and really see it as an asset and maintain it to thrive in California as the economy that we are.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for sharing that. And while we wait for our poll results to come back out, I'll address a few of the questions in there. Looking at the master plan, where do our early childhood special education classroom models fit? That is still under CDE. That is part of our IDEA funds. And so that's under Heather's division. And we'll be partnering closely between Steve and Heather to really make sure more of that becomes inclusive programs as much as possible moving forward. A really good point around how difficult it is to answer a poll question around which is most important when a lot of the areas, especially around equity and anti-racist, anti-hate work, means you have to move forward multiple pieces of work simultaneously. Very critical. And then where does Head Start fit into this? Head Start is one of those gold standards that we're always looking to as we look at how they fit inclusion and how they require 10% of their young children engaged to have IEPs or individualized education plans as part of it. So Head Start is part of our overall early learning system in California, and one of our partners that as we look to additional transitions work as we transition young children from preschool to kindergarten and TK that we'll be partnering with to make sure that we're all together in how we address transitions. And there's a comment around future legislation that will ensure all young children learn more than one language in the first 8 years. You must be one of those people who wrote that, that understands the criticalness of that brain development and how babies can learn more than one language. And how do we work as California to position ourselves and our young children and build off the assets of multilingualism to really support children in their home language and then in acquiring a second language throughout all of that. And it looks like my video paused for a while, but I'm back. And we deeply, I think that's part of Veronica's Global 2030, is that not just our children and students, but more and more educators will also be bilingual so that we can create a pipeline with teachers who understand bilingual development and can support that. So as we look at the poll results, how many of you are connected from an early learning and care program or a preschool program to your elementary school or your school district? Somewhat connected is 51%, but not at all connected is 17%. And so part of why we all want to dive into this work with you is that we reduce the not at all connected and increase the very connected and the completely connected so that those are more of our strengths. And as we look at the biggest barrier to it, different funding streams comes up, work hours, but it's the perception and the value is really coming up as one of those barriers and wanting to change that. And the greatest areas that need support to improve connection and alignment, requiring collaboration between our school districts and our California State Preschool Program was the highest one of those. And then the perception that preschool and TK-3 are unrelated. So more around attitudes and beliefs as we move forward. Thank you for those. All right, so as we moved from our what is PITA-3? It includes both horizontal and vertical alignment and coherence that help coordinate efforts across early learning and care from pre-K or even from birth up to 12th grade, so all the way through that system. It stems from a belief that gaps in children's opportunities and learning outcomes demand organization and system level reform at the state, county, district, and community level. And it includes a framework with cross-sector work, administrator and teacher effectiveness, instructional tools, the learning environment, data-driven improvement, engaged families, and continuity and pathways. So we thank you for our partners at the National P3 Center for that slide. So as we move on, why do we really care? So what was our call to action? And a lot of this actually comes from our data on our California School Dashboard, which points to a compelling need for this work. We continue to have achievement gaps and need to do our work differently in order to narrow and close those. So those of you who aren't as familiar with our accountability system, it reports on how our districts and schools and student groups are performing across state and local measures to help parents and educators identify strengths and areas for improvement. Performance on state measures using comparable statewide data is represented by one of 5 colors. So you can see that red is the lowest performance, then orange, then yellow, then green, then blue. Now, at the same time, we want to talk a little bit around there are equity issues with standardized tests, and data itself can be used for good and for bad. And so really needing to understand where all children and students are so that we can then prioritize and focus investments, see what's not working well, look at equity issues across our dual language learners and our students with disabilities, and do better. And so using data to inform our decision-making is a key part of why we're here. We also want to highlight some of the roles that our community-based organizations, if I back up a second, have in our preschool and the P3 work. So going back to that slide, it's not just the local educational agencies, but those of you who are a community-based organization and you can provide the care for a family that's needed if they need 10 hours or more than 10 hours. And so when we say it takes a village or it takes all of us, there is so much work and so much need. This isn't just one sector, but this is actually all of us coming together to address it. So looking at our color-coded performance from 2019 is part of what really came to us as a way to back map. Where do we see areas that California needs to do better? And then how do we tackle those? How do we tackle chronic absenteeism? How do we look at suspension rates and graduation rates? What about college career, or how students are doing on English language arts or mathematics? And then what Heather pointed out earlier, our disproportionality in special education. So truly having those areas drive a lot of what we do. Moving on. Research is clear that a P3 approach can really help address this. Decades of research evidence clearly establish the evidence for the California Department of Education working to ensure children have access to high quality preschool experiences, effective early intervention supports, multilingual program models, and aligned early elementary instruction to close the achievement gap in California. Developmental gaps between vulnerable young children and their peers begin early and grow through preschool, and then become the achievement gaps in elementary and secondary school, unless other learning opportunities, such as quality preschool, intervene to identify and address special needs, support dual language learners, and disrupt racial biases and inequities. Children living in poverty, dual language learners, and children of immigrants and children with special needs reap benefit from preschool that are as strong or stronger than those of less vulnerable children. Children with disabilities, including those with the most significant disabilities and the highest needs, can make significant developmental and learning progress, and children without disabilities also benefit from inclusive early childhood settings. All children display challenging behaviors during the development. However, when those behaviors mix with explicit or implicit racial and gender bias, educators with inadequate professional learning support may label children as behavior problems, especially boys of color, leading to higher rates of suspension and expulsion and fewer high-quality early learning opportunities for these children. With sufficient knowledge, skill, and experience, preschool and early elementary educators play a critical role in supporting each child's potential and identifying areas where additional support is needed. The early elementary years are critical for sustaining the benefits of high-quality preschool. Concepts children learn during their preschool experience are frequently retaught when they enter kindergarten. If teachers are equipped with the skills and competencies necessary to provide inclusive, individualized instruction that aligns with preschool, vulnerable young children will undoubtedly fare better. And that is our call to action at CDE. We're now going to launch our next poll. As we said, because we couldn't really have everyone talk, we had to do a lot of polls to hear your voices. So these questions will get into some of the future P2 work and your vision of preschool. And after this, I'll be handing off to Steve in just a second. So as you look at those questions, I will turn over to your FAQs and see if there's anything else I can do. So a question about mixed delivery system. And not only do we here at CDE have the California State Preschool Program, which is a mixed delivery system, but we also look to the master plan, which calls out TK, but also calls out the community-based organizations as we build out a universal system for 4s, and as we expand our system to 3, including not just children who are income eligible, but including all of our children with IEPs and with disabilities as part of our work on inclusive settings. Now, all of this is in the master plan, and we realize that we still need additional funds to be able to do this. So we will continue to work on it so that as funding becomes more available, we have already done work with all of you to address standards, to address how do we support mixed delivery. So we address full day, full year as part of that component for our working families. So we look at issues in access. So we unpack data to understand who has access, what level of quality do they have access to, and how do we see development supported through all of that. a quick question around TK age. That's something that Steve won't probably address on this one, but we know that there are questions around laws and legalities in who can be engaged in various programs is often set in our education code, which comes out of law. All right, so from this one, it looks like the biggest barrier to providing high quality preschool is the inadequate funding to support teachers' compensation and access. So as we've said and noted a couple times, not is it just expanding access, but expanding access at a level that allows for the quality of those standards and allows for teacher compensation at the rate and level of compensation and salary and benefits that really acknowledges their role as well as their educational levels in the system. And then some of the things around an unprepared workforce or teacher shortage. We know that teacher pipelines continue to be an issue in California, especially as we try to grow that pipeline for teachers who can support children with disabilities, who can support and promote bilingualism or multilingualism, and to have more teachers and male teachers of color as part of the system so that our children and students see themselves in the teachers and administrators. As well as looking at what is the greatest area of support needed. So workforce development, professional learning, but the number one is expanded and targeted funding to provide more preschool opportunities. Thank you all for responding to that poll. All right, so as we go into building a stronger preschool program, I'm going to hand this off to Steve. So Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. And we've talked a couple times in this evening or this afternoon about data and how important it is as we make decisions. And so if we can go to the next slide, we have some of the data that we'd like to look at. And so as we think about building a stronger preschool system, we always need to keep at the forefront who our children are. Our vision must be inclusive of all of the children and families we serve, and mindful of who is eligible for subsidized early learning and care services. So starting with the larger population frame, California has 6.4 million children under the age of 13. With California having one of the most generous eligibility thresholds in the country, about 2.7 million of these children are eligible for subsidized early learning and care programs, or another way of saying it is 42% of all children under age 13. As a reminder, most early learning and care programs have eligibility requirements. So there are things around age, child being under 13 years old. There are income thresholds, and families for most programs need to have a need for services. It's important to note that the need for services is not necessarily a requirement for preschool age children in the California State Preschool Program. So looking at the chart here on this slide, you can see the vast majority of children under 13 in California are children of color. And of the 2.7 million under 13 that are eligible for subsidized early learning and care programs, an even larger share of children are of color than the rest of the population. So specifically, 66% of all children eligible for early learning and care are Hispanic, compared to 52% for the overall population. So we see some overrepresentation there. 7% of all children eligible for early learning and care are African American, compared to 5% for the overall population. And I won't read everything on the slide, but you can see we have some overrepresentation in some of our in terms of eligibility for early learning and care programs. I think we can move to the next slide, please. So now let's dive a little deeper into the data for preschool, since that is of particular interest to CDE, since so many of our children are preschool age children. And after the transition of many programs to CDSS, the California State Preschool Program is staying at CDE. This chart here shows the percent of eligible preschool age children served in programs currently at CDE. So overall, as you can see from the middle bar of the chart where it says overall, We serve nearly a third of eligible preschoolers in one of the CDE run programs that serve preschool age children. There are multiple programs that we have that serve preschool age children. I'll note here though that of all of those programs, the California State Preschool Program is the most predominant of all programs serving preschool age children. So however, as you can see from the top two bars on the chart, nearly 40% of eligible African-American preschoolers and over a third of eligible Hispanic preschoolers are served. So this is, while we still have a ways to go, this is pretty good news for equity, since we know many of these children are maybe dual language learners or face additional barriers as a result of decades of systemic and institutional racism. Let's roll to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as we look more at preschool and what the master plan says, we hear loudly the recommendation that California build one unified system of state-funded preschool for 3- and 4-year-old children. The plan proposes to do this by, first, aligning and strengthening current programs to create an enhanced preschool program for 3- and 4-year-old children, creating a phased-in universal preschool for all 4-year-old children, and providing phased-in access to preschool for all income-eligible 3-year-old children, starting with highest need areas. In addition, the master plan recommends wraparound care for income-eligible families while providing a fee-based option for all other families, starting with areas with high concentration of families in poverty to expand preschool, so thinking districts receiving LCFF concentration funding, and then encouraging and supporting partnerships. And let's see here. So we've talked about how the master plan recommends providing California's 3- and 4-year-old children with access to a high quality preschool experience. So in thinking about CDE's role, our role in this effort will be to work with programs and engage partners to advance legislation and develop regulations to create a new California preschool program with enhanced program standards and elements that apply to all organizations providing preschool services. To say a little bit more about how the master plan recommends addressing standards for high quality program, it sets recommendation for hours of care for both 4-year-old children and 3-year-old children, provides recommendations for a CTC issued credential with specialization in early childhood education, or a proposed PK3 credential for classroom serving 4-year-old children. And then in classroom serving 3-year-old children, recommendation that teachers have an AA degree with specialization in early childhood education. In carrying this out, the CDE will also work with stakeholders to assess barriers to inclusion and the implementation of bilingual program models, and develop recommendations and/or strategies to pilot. With CSS and First 5 California, the CDE will also oversee a system to engage partners to fully design and implement system changes, and will consider re-engaging the Transforming the Workforce Birth to 8 stewardship group to align with the state's previous workforce efforts. And then to ensure equitable treatment of all children and to work towards eliminating bias, the master plan recommends proactively identifying and reporting children's language status and special education program needs. Again, we get back to the importance of data. So in coordination with CDSS, the CDE will oversee legislation requiring programs providing subsidized care to identify and report relevant data, regulatory development to support it, the development and implementation of professional development, training, and technical assistance. And then we'll share as part of an early childhood data dashboard or other widely shared resource, annual suspension and expulsions disaggregated by race and ethnicity, language, and disability. And I think I get to do some poll questions now. So we have 2 more poll questions up here on the screen. So the first is, from your point of view, what is the biggest barrier to providing high quality preschool for all in your community? And then the second question we have is, from your point of view, what is the greatest area of support needed to improve inclusion in your early learning and care slash preschool program or in your school or district? Anything
So
else?
while you all fill that part out, I'll address a few more questions. A really good one about desegregating our system. So one of the pieces that we talked about pretty frequently in that master plan sponsor team was how our current system creates segregation by income level. And the research actually showing the more you desegregate and create inclusion across everything, including income levels, the better the results for all children. So that is something that we've definitely been talking about, and as part of, as we expand, looking at how we make programs truly more inclusive to everyone, and where we look at family fees or co-pays or sliding family fee scale to ensure more and more children. Another component around Native American children not being listed on our slide, and I think it was because it was such a small amount, it couldn't show up in the way that it was there, but that is a great equity issue. So we will look at how we make sure, even if it is a really small number, to us, that is a really critical part of California and a critical part of our equity work. And needing to see more of our teachers and teachers of color and diversity across all levels, across our coaches, across basically the higher pay and the administrative levels, not just in the entry levels of our system. And we fully agree. And that was part of the competencies-based component of the master plan and the work. And developmentally appropriate practice, also critical there, which is why we think core understanding of child development and growth and how young children learn and how to best support that learning in intentional ways that build off play and responsive interactions needs to be a critical component of whatever we're doing moving forward. Steve, do you want to share the poll?
Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. So looking at the first question here on the biggest barrier to inclusion in the early learning and care or preschool program, looks like we've got collaboration barriers between general ed and special ed and related services, which seems to be a theme that I know that we hear, and is exactly kind of why we're in this. And then teacher preparation and professional development barriers is a close second. So both things that we have, both things that are important to address. And so the next question here, your point of view, what is the greatest area of support needed to improve inclusion in your program? Teacher preparation and teacher preparation and professional development barriers, and then collaboration barriers between general education and special education services is a close second. And I know, I think I will halt here and then I will hand off. I think, in thinking about time here, I will invite our director for special education, Heather, back to lead us through our next section on early intervention.
Thank you, Stephen. The slide that I mentioned earlier, and you can move to the next slide, in relation to where California sits in terms of preschool LRE trends versus the national average. Again, we see the indicators 6A, which, to remind you, are peers that are included in regular preschool settings, and indicator B, which indicates which services are occurring outside of the setting, in a separate setting, and so on and so forth. So what we see here on the left-hand side is California's 6A result from 2017, which is just a hair above 35%. I think it's roughly 37% of our preschoolers are receiving services in a regular preschool setting, compared with the national average of over 50%. On the right-hand side, you see 6B, which is students receiving services in a separate setting. So we see that number jump to almost 35%, and then the national average is right around 20%. So across the state, we would love to see this number, or these numbers sort of invert, if you will, so that more children are receiving services in a regular preschool setting. I wanted to add just a little note to that as well. This is 2017 data. And I did want to indicate something interesting with our 2019 SPP data for these indicators is showing a trend that the left-hand side in terms of our 6A is actually decreasing. So less students are accessing inclusive classrooms, and our indicator B is actually increased so that we are seeing more students being served in separate setting. So the trend is trending in the wrong direction in California at this point in time. Next slide. So this slide here indicates is a map of California, again, of that 6A data that I mentioned before. And so this is a county by county visual representation of the range of the percentage of preschoolers that are included in receiving their services in regular settings. So we see the range anywhere from 4% to 83%. And again, our state average being right around 37% and 36.5. So the green, obviously, not the green, obviously, but let me, the green is indicating places where there is a high inclusion rate. And the red, the yellows, and the oranges, we see decreased rates of inclusion. So again, California has a wide range of approaches and models, which I think deserves a deeper dive into learning more about, again, the variance of the range, of the variance of the barriers that present to different programs across the state. Next slide. This slide here is really a stair step in terms of how we would consider or look at services or supports for preschool students with IEPs. And I want to draw your attention to sort of the top stair over to the right-hand side of the slide is really the goal, right? That the child with an IEP attends a preschool, has the supports and services, teachers are able to support their learning, social emotional needs, and they are participating in all classroom activities with their peers, right? And so from there, if you back down the steps, there's some part of services or some form of services, but not quite clearly the goal in terms of the sort of holistic approach to providing supports and services to students with disabilities in preschool settings. So the state average that sort of, we saw in the past couple of slides would most likely hit anywhere from the top 3 stairs, so that, our programs overall are providing some way, shape, or form services that are outlined in the top 3 stairs here. And again, I think it's, critical that we examine and look at sort of that top tier and really drill down and determine what's the extent to which the child care program is really fully supported to provide those full access and participation to the child and really address those barriers as well. And next slide. And in terms of transition to inclusion and early elementary are really key. We know that, and I call it the on-ramp, if you will, in terms of some of those Part C to Part B transitions. And what we see oftentimes are disruption in services that from early learning and care systems to pre-K settings to the K-12 system. And most notably support needed in terms of family involvement and participation. So that's an area that, or a system that needs focus and attention in order to better support those transitions from early learning. And then also children thriving in inclusive preschool settings should have the opportunity to really continue in those settings in elementary school. And so, really, again, looking at those barriers as to why, inclusive preschool settings, perhaps if children are included in preschool or inclusive preschool settings, sometimes children then are experiencing their education in a separate setting when they get to the kindergarten years and early learning, or kindergarten 1-2 years. And so it's, CDE, we're eager to really dig into determining during those transitions, what systems are providing challenges, looking at mindsets and beliefs, so that children can continue in those inclusive settings throughout their educational career as well. Much of this work in relation to early childhood special education is supported by 5 projects across the state. And we're really eager and excited about some of the work that we're doing in terms of supporting inclusive practices for our young learners, and we'll certainly be looking for more opportunities in the future to increase our supports to the field as well. And I think I have a poll here as well for the next slide. And so what is your vision for the future of early intervention and inclusion? And you can go to the next slide, the questions. So
Heather,
again,
I
we
can
see
start off
yeah.
on our polling, and so these are the responses they gave at our last time, but they should be the responses to your questions. Apologies for that.
All right. You guys jumped the gun. All right, so we are on track here. But so these questions actually align with this sort of section. So as Stephen had stated before, collaboration barriers between general education and special education related service providers, again, is really one of the biggest areas to inclusive environments. And then that second question again is teacher preparation, and then collaboration as well. So I think very, very important notes for the CDE team to continue to discuss and collaborate on as well. And so at this point in time, I will hand it over to Veronica.
Thank you, Heather. Moving on, and hopefully we have enough time to cover these points. There are many things to know about serving young dual language learners in California, as Steve and Heather have mentioned earlier. I'm going to build on what they have stated, as dual language learners can be dually identified, meaning that they can be learning another language and have special education needs. We know we have multiple languages spoken in California. We know that in K-12 space, there are 1.1 million English learners or dual language learners, which is another area we need to focus on, having the same terminology. And we also know that 80% of those English learners or dual language learners in the K-12 world are Spanish speaking. 80% are Spanish speaking or have a primary language that's Spanish. Over half of the K-12 student population has reported a language other than English spoken in the home. Therefore, it is extremely critical to maintain their home language at an early age instead of waiting for high school to offer a second language as a course of study. We know identification of young dual language learners is an area that continues to need more research and improvement. Although we have made advancements, we need to continue to develop better screening and language assessment tools and offer programs to maintain the child's home language. A good example is the Sobrado Early Academic Language Program, or SEAL program, that has an articulated preschool to third grade language program. The department this year developed a remote assessment for K through 12, or the LPAC as we know it in the K-12 world. However, there is more to be done to identify dual language learners in the early learning space. We know that supporting home language development improves English language development and child development overall. Developing the home language is also valuable in its own right, as it helps students stay connected with their family and culture. It builds on their social, emotional well-being and sense of self-value. Additionally, dual language learners appear to benefit more from high-quality preschool experiences than their English-only peers. And finally, research shows that involving families is vital to dual language learners learning and helps them grow developmentally. On July 12, 2017, the California English Learner or EL Roadmap Policy was approved by the California State Board of Education, which updates California's policy for educating English learners to an asset-oriented model, which values the various languages and cultures in California. We do have a new policy that's asset-oriented. This policy has 4 principles. The first one is asset-oriented and needs-responsive schools or needs-responsive early education settings. Principle 2 is an intellectual quality instruction and meaningful access. Principle 3 is systems conditions that support effectiveness. And principle 4 is alignment and articulation within and across systems, which is what we're talking about today. Together, these 4 principles guide California on a path towards embracing multilingualism. The EL Roadmap Policy and associated guidance are available on the CDE Roadmap webpage at the address on the slide, and it is implementing this policy that is critical to advancing the opportunities for dual language students in the preschool through 3rd grade setting. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, Early Edge California has been a key partner in the English Learner Roadmap Policy implementation in early childhood education. Early Edge California adapted the 4 EL Roadmap principles for the early childhood setting. The document, California EL Roadmap Implications for Early Learning Teachers and Administrators, is a key document that if you have not seen, I recommend you visit that link. This document takes the 4 EL Roadmap principles and provides information on what this means in the early learning setting. The steps that are articulated in this document are clear and actionable for both teachers and administrators, for early educators working in early learning settings. The document is available on the link. And last but not least, as part of the Multilingual Division, I am fortunate to oversee the Federal Migrant Education Program, which is different than the State Early Education Migrant Program that Steve oversees. As you know, the migrant families are those that move around picking crops. And as Sarah mentioned, I actually was one of those children that move around picking crops. So it's important for us to keep in mind that these students and families need additional support. The CDE Migrant Education Office also supports the EL Roadmap Policy, implementing it in early learning through the Family Biliteracy Program. The purpose of the Family Biliteracy Program grant is to promote site-based family literacy education. This program serves preschool-age migratory children and their families. The goal of the program are to engage the migrant families into the school community by valuing their culture and linguistic assets the family already possess, integrating the family unit into the educational experience by utilizing the family's first language to teach and model literacy strategies that families may replicate at home in the absence of the teacher, and incorporate an adult parenting education component that builds awareness about the value of biliteracy and other school practices. By promoting an asset-based, biliteracy-focused curriculum, this program helps ensure that young dual language learners and their families embrace the home language as an asset and are ready for kindergarten and to navigate the school system. For the K-12 programs, the CDE has developed a way to capture the types of program being offered that promote biliteracy. And to date, we have grown from what used to be 400 programs to now 740 programs. That's not enough. So we need to continue to work together to increase those numbers. So looking at the time, Sarah, do we want to launch this last poll?
You know me, I'm pretty passionate like you about DLL.
Okay, so taking the information presented, what is your vision for the future of multilingual support in the early years and grades? Please take a moment to answer the questions. So from your point of view, what is the greatest challenge to be able to establish dual multilingual programs for preschool age children? The second question, from your point of view, what professional learning strategies would support the implementation of an effective bilingual preschool program? And from your point of view, what is the greatest support needed to maintain a dual language, multilingual language program for preschool age children? We're gonna pause a little bit just to take those last few answers on the poll. And Sarah, do you want to take over or do you want me to?
I'll have you read the results out, Veronica, when they come, but you're right, we only have 2 minutes left, so we do want to share some appreciations with all of you. And while we're waiting for those poll results, just know that we know a lot of other questions came in. We will continue to work with all of you in a variety of ways, and the survey will also give us additional input on how you'd like to be included in roll up your sleeve work groups, in additional big groups like this where we get more feedback via polls or surveys. But just know that there is a lot of work to do in this space over the next couple years, and we will always continue to partner with all of you as well as with our field. Veronica, do you want to read those?
Sure. The greatest challenge is having sufficient providers of centers that are literate in the primary language. I have to say that matches what I thought would be the answer. The second one, what professional learning strategy would support implementation, incorporating the English learner development principle as a foundation for professional learning. That is definitely an area we will continue to work with all of our stakeholders to make sure that we can roll that out and implement it with fidelity. And the third one, technical assistance from various organizations, including the California Department of Education. That is the greatest support needed to maintain a dual language program for preschool children. Well, we definitely have all of you to help us, so we look forward to continuing that work.
And with our last couple seconds left, we'll end on our CDE moving forward slide. One of the reasons we wanted to have this is knowing that a majority of our early learning and care programs are moving over to the California Department of Social Services. And while our team has been working every single day with DSS on that transition, we also wanted to make space to work with all of you on what remains at CDE and how do we build better, not just keep the same what is here at CDE, and how do we create alignments both internally in our organization and across with all of you so that we do become a multilingual, fully inclusive program that addresses racism, addresses equity, and creates those opportunities for all of our young children and families. So CDE moving forward, this is just one of my favorite slides right now, because this is all of us. Nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society. Why? Because human beings are the most dynamic link to the divine on this planet. So John Lewis, somebody we lost this year, but who has had an impact on all. And then lastly, somebody else we lost, but also is able to have us look at, so often in life, things that you regard as an impediment turn out to be a great good fortune. And so we're really trying to embrace this moment, knowing that it's tough in so many ways, personally, professionally, across all the multitude of things that have happened in 2020, and say, how do we build better and how do we work together in all of that? So thank you, everyone. We appreciate your participation. Please look for a survey to be released to all of you. And thank you, thank you, thank you as we move forward. We will stay on knowing that most of you will have to jump off and hopefully go get some yummy dinner with your families. And I don't know about you, but my dog is getting more and more anxious for me to be able to get up and move away from the computer. So as we close out, my thank you to Veronica, Steve, and Heather for joining us, to my team with Tina, Teresa, and Susan helping to Bree for helping with a lot of this content and support, to Beth for creating a lot of the content and slides, and to GPG Masters with Hanato on here and Maggie having helped, and to our TSD team as they ensured that we were able to actually have a whole Zoom webinar and create polls and move back and forth. It does take a multitude of all of us to be able to do this work, and we appreciate every single one of you.
And Sarah, I just want to confirm for those that are still on the line, is it correct that we'll be sending the survey link to all of the registrants via email? Is that correct?
Yep, so that will go out and you all should be able to then complete the survey from that. All right, I'm watching the numbers go down as people jump off. So questions about slides and that kind of thing. And our team, we're going to create a P23 place. And so once we create that on our website, we can start adding other links and components that really pull together, I would say, all three of your divisions, but also looking over to our curriculum and instructions and some of the data components that also work across CDE. All right, I think we are good to end the event. Thank you, thank you, thank you, especially my team here. Heather, please do not stay up all night now that you've had a bunch of coffee. Take care, and I will see you all tomorrow as we jump back into the space.
Yes.